A live-action Winx Club that will definitely include Bloom and Sky? All right, Netflix, you've got our attention.
Say no more, Bloom. You can always count on us.
The Winx Club is about tough-as-nails female fairies who develop unbreakable bonds while finding love and fighting monsters. But the live-action version is less colorful and includes fewer fairies. So is Fate, the Winx Saga, going to blow our Alfean socks off, or leave us at the mercy of the burned ones? We all know TV has a thing for dark and gritty remakes, but is it always a good thing? When it comes to the Winx Club, it looks like Netflix is focusing on a more dramatic and less eccentric tale of a group of young fairies as they try to develop their powers and reach their potential. But we can't help but wonder, does that mean Fate, the Winx Saga, will have little to do with the original show beyond concept, and will its characters captivate us like they used to? The Winx Club came out in 2004, but the series continued right up until 2019. There are some definite things the new series has in common with its predecessor. The story will focus on Bloom, played by Abigail Cohen, whose powers have just started to manifest. It'll take place in the Otherworld, and Alfea will remain the boarding school where a group of powerful young fairies can train to earn their wings, and the specialists will be in charge of guarding the realm from some new threat called the Burned Ones. In a press release, Netflix described the series as being about a group of fairies who must learn to master their magical powers while navigating love, rivalries, and the monsters that threaten their very existence. Obviously, we're excited for the love stories, since we're still obsessed with the Winx Club epic romances between fairies and specialists.
Need a hand, girls?
In particular, we noticed that Prince Sky will be a part of the series and played by Danny Griffin. We can also spot Riven, played by Freddie Thorpe. The series was created by Brian Young, who previously worked on The Vampire Diaries. So, can we expect a bunch of romantic, high-stakes drama set amongst a group of young adults? Most definitely. But since the fairies are the focus of the original series, you'd think you'd see all of them included in the reboot, right? Well, that's actually not the case. And in fact, these fairies seem to be almost entirely different from the originals. What's similar is that the girls still have their powers. There's Water Fairy Aisha, played by Precious Mustafa, Mind Fairy Musa, played by Elisha Applebaum, and Light Fairy Stella, played by Hannah van der Westhuizen. There's also a new Earth Fairy named Terra, played by Elliot Salt, who seems to be replacing Flora for some reason. And then there's one character, Technology Fairy Techna, who's missing from the reboot completely, which is pretty disappointing. But even with familiar powers, it's the way they use them that's so different. Their clothing, hairstyling, and entire vibe are obviously pretty different too. Brian Young did that on purpose, though, because he wanted to give the series a dose of reality. One major perk of a live-action reboot is that they can cast real girls with different shapes and proportions. Very different from the original fairies' giant eyes, skinny outfits, and impossible bodies. But without the colors and flamboyant magic, it can be hard to see where the Winx Saga gets all its winks from. After all, is it just a show about fairies, or is it a show about the Winx Club? Since it's not animated, Young also opted to create the magical Otherworld in Ireland. The Irish landscape gives Fate its connection to ancient fairy magic and kind of feels like Hogwarts for fairies, especially with the darker tones and royal gates, plus the historical and epic-looking Alfea. Modernizing the Otherworld also meant getting rid of some of the gender roles that Brian Young wasn't so crazy about in the original. He explained that, in our show, boys can be fairies, girls can be specialists, which we're totally on board with. We can already see some of the diversity on campus. There also won't be any mean girl drama amongst the fairy friends in this one, as Young wants to leave all the cliquey stuff back in the real world. As for enemies, if the first few seasons of the Winx Club are anything to go by, we might see the Tricks, or even Lord Darker, though it's hard to say this early how much the show might deviate from the original's villains. The Burned Ones are the only specific monsters mentioned by Netflix so far, and they're a brand new addition. Despite changes though, Young seems to have kept the entire purpose of the Winx Club in mind when creating this reboot. He mentioned, "It's always the thing that makes you feel different, and like an outcast that is your gift to the world." Fate is meant to be a story of inclusion and finding your power. And isn't that exactly the type of lesson the Winx Club taught us when we were kids?
Never in my life have I been so happy to have a fairy friend.
You mean a fairy with magic powers who can pack a good punch if need be?
A few networks, but Netflix in particular, have really been getting a kick out of remaking successful classic shows into darker, edgier series. Just look at Riverdale. or The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, which adds some grit to animated or childhood content. But does it really work? In these kinds of shows, there's usually a huge focus on finding the reality within fantasy. We often see regular people going to regular high schools, for example, or living within the real world, but they have something dramatically different and otherworldly about them. Even in Riverdale, there's a distinct sense that this isn't the real world. It's way too crazy. And with so many strange and terrible things happening, it's a clear escape from reality. It's a nice idea to make it more realistic, but it seems like other than names and a concept, there's not much visually connecting the Winx Saga to the Winx Club. Whereas in something like Riverdale, the characters are obviously stylistically based on the Archie Comics characters. While it's also nice to see realistic bodies, Fate doesn't seem to have as much diversity as we would expect from the very diverse group of fairies in the original. Like, why is there no Latina Flora? Why isn't Musa Asian? And why is Technica missing completely? It's clear to see that these are very different girls joining forces, but it would be nice to see a bit more color since cultural diversity was one of the things the Winx Club did so well. Another question we have for all these remakes is, why darkness? Where's all the fun? It seems like TV's new obsession is with being edgy and dangerous, but some shows are campy for a reason. And it might have been nice to see the live-action Winx characters look just as eccentric as their animated counterparts. Shows like this likely do these dark remakes because they want fans who watched something when they were younger to be intrigued by a more grown-up version. For example, the Charmed remake was touted as being for fans, but in reality, it feels like a show for young adults that most original fans of Charmed are actually too old for now. It might draw some people in because of nostalgia, but most of its fans are a new audience that might have only caught up with the original Charmed after watching the reboot. But of course, that doesn't mean there's no potential in a completely remade series. Like Charmed, the Winx Saga could be the next great show about women with incredible magical powers, replacing the recently canceled Sabrina. Abigail Cohen was actually in Sabrina as Dorcas, so it's fitting that she could carry the torch for the next great female-powered fantasy show. For younger audiences who want to enjoy a colorful anime version, well, the animated one still exists. This remake is supposed to be for people who want more and want the series to grow with them. So will Fate, the Winx Saga, connect with the Winx Club audience? Or will it draw an entirely new audience and still be successful? We think it depends on just how deep they dive into these characters' motivations, and whether or not the burned ones are terrible yet interesting villains that keep us invested in the story. The Winx Club is about friendship, finding your power, and coming together. So if they can get this vibe right, even with a darker and grittier look, then the Winx girls could find themselves fighting live-action enemies for many years to come. Do you think Fate, the Winx Saga will be a hit? Do you plan on watching? Let us know all your thoughts in the comment section down below. Don't forget to hit that like button while you're here and subscribe to our channel for more. Thanks for watching!